Hello and welcome to another video on Azure Data Factory. In this video and the next video, what I want to take a look at is Azure Data Factory integration with Logic Apps. Now the reason I want to stop and take a look at that is because Azure Logic Apps allow you to greatly increase the capabilities of Azure Data Factory. So I remember when I was first learning Data Factory a couple of years ago, we had somebody who worked for us named Josh Owen. And there were countless times I would reach out and say, hey, there's something that I don't know how to do. Should I do an Azure function? Should I do this? Should I do that? And every time he would point me to Azure Logic Apps. And so very quickly, I realized Azure Logic Apps is a great way to extend the capability of Azure Data Factory. Now, in one of my previous videos, what I did is I took a look at the copy activity and the delete activity. What that allows you to do is essentially archive a file and then delete that file from the original location. In this video, I'm going to repeat that process, but I'm going to do it with Azure Logic Apps. Now, there's some redundancy there because we've done it before, but it's going to build out essentially the use case for when you would want to do this. Now, this pattern that I'm going to show you here, and we're going to jump right in a minute, I use this for sending emails. I use this for building a notification framework. If you want to do countless things that can't be done at this point in time in Azure Data Factory, you can leverage Azure Logic Apps to do that. So let's go ahead and jump right in. I'm going to take the pipeline that we built in a previous video here, and I am going to copy it. I'm going to clone it, and then we're going to modify it to fit this example. So for example, I am getting the metadata from a folder. I'm returning all of the files from a folder in my Blob storage account. The filter activity is filtering it down to just the 4 files in that folder that we want. Remember, they have to have input imp as the starting characters. And then the for each activity, if we go into that, what this guy is doing right here is it's copying the data over from our source file to our archive folder, and then it's deleting it from the source file. So all of that we set up and we configured in a previous video, a couple of videos, so I'm not going to review that. I like to keep these videos nice and short. So we are going to go ahead and make a copy of an existing pipeline that we have, and then I'll go ahead and give this guy a quick name change here. So we'll say 8, and then I'm going to call this, say Logic App delete. All right. So we'll come back to this guy in just a minute. What I'm going to do first is let's go ahead and build out the Azure Logic App. So we'll go over to here. I'm going to go to my resource group, and I'm going to create a new resource. And then I'll go ahead and search for Logic App. Grab that right there. And then I'm going to create a new Logic App. And all we have to do is give it our subscription, a resource group, a name, and then we're good to go. So we will go ahead and choose our resource group. Going to be YouTube, of course. Logic App, we'll call this something like ADF. And then, delete files, right? And then East US, that's it, review and create. So this is going to go ahead and create that Logic App. We're going to create another one in the next video that I do, and that's going to actually be the reverse. How do we build out some logic in Logic App, and then once that work is done, then you call a Data Factory pipeline and pass parameters through. That part's tricky, but if you watch the next video, I will put that in that video. Now, we're going to go to the resource. I'm going to show you how to set this up. If you've never been in Logic Apps before, this is not an intro video to that. Just know that at its core, when you're working with a Logic App, you need 2 things minimum. You need a trigger. The trigger is going to be what starts that Logic App. That's what kicks it off. The other thing that you're going to need is an action. So every Logic App will have a trigger that kicks it off, that starts that flow, that automated workflow that you're developing. The other is you must have at least one action. Now these can be extremely robust, very exciting. You can do incredible things with this. In fact, if you're familiar with Power Platform or Power Automate, previously known as Microsoft Flow, Logic Apps is essentially the parent of that, right? So when Microsoft Flow, now called Power Automate, was created, it was created and derived from the Azure Logic Apps code. So the technologies are the same. If you know one, you know the other. That's what it is. It's building automated workflows in the portal. Now, we could choose an existing trigger, or we could create a just brand new blank app, and the first thing it will prompt you to do is create a trigger. I'm going to go ahead and choose this one right here. When an HTTP request is received, this is essentially us saying, look, this is going to be a REST, this is going to be an API call, right? from our Data Factory pipeline, we're going to make an API call to kick this off. So we'll go ahead and grab when an HTTP request is received. And what will happen here is we need to build out this JSON body. Now, I've got some code. I'm going to copy the code in. I'm going to zoom in, and we're going to talk about this real quick here. This schema right here, I actually got this a couple years ago, if I remember correctly, from Microsoft documentation, from tutorials. Now, it wasn't this exact code. This has been changed very much. The one that I got from Microsoft documentation was 4 different parameters, and it was for sending a notification from Azure Data Factory. And so that was one of the first times I ever used Logic Apps. I think it was the first time I ever used Logic Apps, actually, in general, not even just with Azure Data Factory. And so what I'm doing here is we're going to have a parameter that we pass in from the Data Factory pipeline called container. And then we're going to have another parameter that we pass in that's going to be the name of the file that we want to copy, the name of the file that we want to delete. And that's it. Now we can add to this. If I wanted to put in the archive container name, I could do that. You could add, it's as simple as essentially if you wanted to add additional parameters, you would just copy out this part of the code right here. Copy, paste, and you can add 4 parameters, 5 parameters, however many that you want to have. I've done very robust pipelines using this method. The only reason I spent a little bit of time, and if you've watched any of my videos, you know I like to go very quick and get things done efficiently and effectively and not waste your time and not waste mine. But the reason I spent a little bit of time talking about this is because this is a pattern that you can reuse. If you're executing Logic Apps from Data Factory, you want to know how to modify this code that I'm using right here ever so slightly. And so you can take a look at it there. I'll scroll down, boom, pause it, take a look at that, easy to copy. You can reuse that code. Now, we're not done. So this is the first part. The next part is we need to create a step. What is the step? Well, the step here is going to be a blob storage account. So let me go ahead and type in blob here. And this is going to be an action. And so we have Azure Blob Storage. I can click on that guy right there, and then it's going to show me all of the actions that we can perform with a blob storage account. So I'm going to choose copy blob. All right. And so what this says is essentially I'm going to be copying a blob from one location to another, right? That's what this copy blob is going to do. And so it says specify the URL to the blob. Now notice down here at the bottom it says, hey, you're connected to your blob storage account. I didn't show you how to create that, but if I go down here and I click change connection, what I'll do is I can either choose the connection that I currently have or I can add new. Now when I add new, and I'm going to try to walk through this real quick, you can give it a name. Down here at the bottom, notice that you can manually enter your connection information. So if you needed to create one from scratch, you can come in here and say manually enter connection information. You give it a name, so Azure Blob Storage account, right? Azure Blob Storage. You give it the account name of your storage account. You can see right here I have it open. It's Mitchell Pearson. So I would just type in my name because that's the name of my storage account. So Mitchell Pearson. And then the next one there is the primary key. And so if I come back up here and I click on this, you will get your key by going to your storage account and clicking on access keys, copy that out and paste that in there. The reason I'm not showing this is just so I don't have to spend the time during editing to actually hide my account keys or regenerate and recreate them. The key is essentially if you have access to my key, you have access to my storage account. So I'm trying to prevent that by showing that and then having to worry about protecting it. But that's all you do. That's the steps for creating a connection. Now, what I'm going to do is see if I can't cancel out of there and grab one of my existing. Yeah, so I'm going to use the existing connection. Now, this is saying what is the source URL? Where does the blob that you want to copy currently live? Well, that is actually going to be, let's go ahead and do dynamic content here. That's going to be the container and the file name. Now I'm cheating here. I'm cheating because what I should probably do is use the expression language to concatenate these values together to combine 2 strings, but this will actually work the way that it is. And so I'll show you both methods just to get you a little bit more familiar with it. Now, the other thing that I want to do is I want to tell it what the destination is. And so for this one, I'm going to cheat again and I'm going to just type out archive / and then I'm going to bring in the file name. That's it. So what it's going to do is take it from the source. Remember, we're going to populate these values from our Data Factory. Data Factory is going to send this information in to the Azure Logic App. It's going to read that dynamic content, and then it's going to do the work for us. Now, I'm going to do another step here. The new step that we're going to do is once again going to be an Azure Blob Storage action, but this one is going to be a delete blob. So we're going to delete a blob, and it says right here, specify the blob that you want to delete. Now we could cheat and we could do what we did in the last one. We could just grab the container from our trigger, right? And then we could grab the file name from the trigger as well. But what we're going to do instead is build an expression just to take this a step further, right? This is a video, maybe you haven't seen expression, so this is an opportunity to learn. So I'll grab the concat function, go to dynamic content, then we'll grab our container, we'll put a comma in there, and then it tells you right here, kind of gives you some syntax, a little bit of help, and then we're going to grab the file name. All right, so we have the container and we have the file name. Now, keep in mind, if this is a little bit tricky because we went to the Azure Logic App first, right now those parameters are blank. They're null values. We haven't passed anything in from the pipeline. So if this were to run, it would do nothing, right? We have to execute the pipeline. The pipeline will call this Azure Logic App, and then it'll know what the container is and what the file name is within that connection that we specified. So I'm going to click OK because we're done. And then with that being done, we're done. So now up here at the top, I'll click Save. Now, once you click Save, you get a URL, right? So we click Save. I open up the HTTP request, and I'm going to copy out this URL right here. So we'll copy that guy out, and we're going to be using this inside of our Data Factory pipeline. Now, we're going to go back over to Data Factory, and we're going to modify this guy right here. So the question is, how do we call an Azure Logic App? That's a great question. That's why we're here. The way we call that is with a web activity. So let's go ahead and get rid of these guys. We don't, remember this is a, make sure I'm in the right one. Yep. This is, I'm going to delete this right here. This is that copy that we just created a moment ago. And so we got Azure Logic Apps delete. I'm going to add in an activity inside of the for each activity right here. This is going to be my web activity. And then we need to go ahead and set up and configure the web activity. You'll notice the very first thing that it asks is for that URL to make that API, that method call, right? And so you're going to see that it's a post API method call. The reason we know that, let me just show you this real quick. If I go back to the Logic Apps Designer, it tells you right here, HTTP post URL. So we know it's a post API call. And then I need to copy out some additional code. So let me copy this out real quick. We're going to put it in the body right here. Once again, this is a pattern I've used countless times to call Azure Logic Apps from Data Factory. I'm doing a couple of things here. First of all, I need to create this parameter. So what I'm doing is these are the parameters on the left-hand side right here, container and file name. These are the parameters that exist that we created in our Logic App, in the body of that code in our Logic App. I was looking at my code to make sure that those match correctly, and they do. This is a key value pair. The key is what's in the Logic App. The value on the right-hand side, that's the value that we're going to pass in from Data Factory to that key that's in Logic App. So right here, this is how you would reference a pipeline parameter. Pipeline.parameters container. We haven't created the pipeline parameter yet. We're going to do that in a minute. And this is item name. Now, we've looked at this a couple of times. If you followed my series here on YouTube, you've seen this. This is essentially, remember, we are currently inside of a for each loop. It's looping over an array. It's looping over a list of items. And so from that list of items that we are iterating over, we're saying take the current item that we're currently iterating over and take the name value from that. So that's what we're passing in. If that is confusing to you, I apologize. This is something that I covered a couple of times in a couple of previous videos. Please go back and take a look at the for each video. That'll be very, very helpful and informative. Now, I need to create this container. So let's do this. I'm going to go back over here, and I am going to, let's make sure I'm in, zoom out here in the pipeline. There we go. We're going to create a new parameter, and this is going to be called container. So I've created a new parameter in the pipeline. I have no activities currently selected, and I need to tell it what it is. And so my container name is actually YouTube/. I'm putting the / in there to make my code that I have to write in Logic Apps a lot easier, so I don't have to concatenate or add that / into the code. Not a big deal, but that's why I'm doing that here. And so with that being done, that should be it. Let's test this out. Let's see if it is working the way that we expect it to work. So I'm going to publish everything here. We need to make sure this is published. So we'll go ahead and do that. We'll make sure that gets done successfully. Actually, because I'm running a debug, we didn't have to publish this one. The next video that I do where we're calling a pipeline and passing parameters in from Azure Logic Apps, in that video they will need to be published in advance. All right, so what are we going to do? We are going to run this in debug. It asked me, hey, do you want to change the parameter? Nope, it's good the way that it is. Go ahead and click OK. And it's going to execute that Logic App if we set this up correctly. Fingers crossed. It's going to execute that Logic App. So we can go back over here. We saved it. Let's go ahead and go back one step. I'm going to refresh. Ah, look at that. 4 successful runs. So that tells me that over here, if we refresh this, this should be done as well. So get metadata gets that list of files, filters out the ones that we don't want. For each iterates over those. And then there were 4 files that existed. So the web activity executed 4 times. It called that Logic App 4 times. If we go back to our Logic App, we see that here. If we want to validate, we can do that. Remember, our YouTube container here had 4 files in it previously. It no longer does. If we go over to, let me go back one step. If I go to my archive folder, we now have all of those files right there at 10:28:06 p.m. See how much I love YouTube? At 10:28 at night. There you go. We just moved those files. And so the reason I did this video here, the importance of this video is being able to see the integration capabilities. Could you have done this activity that I just did in Azure, in Azure Data Factory and not had to worry about doing it in Azure Logic Apps? Absolutely, 100%. But if you're familiar with the Logic Apps, you know we could have done a lot of stuff here. We could have sent emails, we could have inserted records into a SQL Server database, we could have tweeted, we could have sent messages to teams, we could have started an approval process. We can do so much with the Logic Apps that just really is not what Data Factory is designed for. And so being able to understand how to call a Logic App, which is an automated workflow that can kick off other processes, that can kick off other workflows, that can, update entire, processes and chains and emails and whatever, is a pretty incredible capability. So this is video 1 on Logic Apps integration. I'm going to do at least one more video that I'm going to record tonight. So you should see the same shirt here. And then we'll see if there's something else that pops up, we might do that as well. Thank you again for watching this video, and I hope to see you again.